Hey everyone. I wanted to start to introduce my value study concepts to you in the group. Some of you have already been posting, excuse me, value studies in with your work already. Those of you who have taken workshops from me kind of know my process, but obviously many of you haven't had a chance to take a workshop from me yet, so I thought it would be good to explain my process here. So basically what I do when I do a value study is I try and break the scene down into three big value ranges: the lights, the mids, and the darks. Okay, so I'll look at a reference photograph and I'll kind of squint down at it and try and look and try and see everything that appears light. And when I sketch the value study, anything that appears light, I just leave the white paper. And then I try to connect everything else into one big middle value shape, and that's represented here. And obviously you can tell this is a farm scene, but when I can connect these distant tree line, this distant tree line with another farm in the background that goes right into the barn and into the trees up here, and then it comes down and connects into the brown of the pasture a little bit and down into some more sheds and some grass and fence posts. Okay, what that does is it anchors your entire composition into two large shapes. It makes it very easily readable from a distance. But another big benefit that it does, that's particularly unique to watercolor, is it allows for a lot of lost edges between shapes. Okay, this lost edge between the barn and the distant trees, this lost edge between the barn and the closer trees, this lost edge between the barn and the pasture. Okay, watercolor, it's so easy to get those lost edges because it's such a fluid medium. You're just working with a big brush with water and pigment, and it just flows. All the other media are stiff, and you have to kind of manually manipulate the edges to lose them and join shapes together. Whereas with watercolor, like I said, you just load your brush up with that pigment and water, and it just kind of nature takes its course. Okay, so when I'm doing these value studies as a preparation for a painting, normally I'll stop at this stage. This is by far the most difficult stage of the painting, I think, when you are trying to take all these separate objects and join them into one big connected shape. Okay, our brains don't really work that way. They look at an object and they see this. They see the barn, they see the trees, they see the pasture, they see the shed, they see the distance. Okay, and we want to make those separations visually, and our brains instantly go to the little details in the scene. But it's really vital, and I'm not saying that the details aren't important, but it's vital that this is underneath all the details as a nice big anchoring shape. Like I said, it's something that reads well from a distance, from across the room. It really anchors your whole composition. It makes it easily understandable for the viewer when they're looking at your painting from 10 feet away. Well, you're working on it right on top of it, so you see all the little stuff, but they're looking at it from a distance, and it needs to make sense. And it's the big anchoring shapes. And most people that take a workshop want to loosen up their paintings a little bit, and the way to loosen up is to find big shapes and areas where you can grab a big brush and mix big puddles of color. Loosening up isn't a little synthetic brush and painting a bunch of small shapes. Okay, it's really important that we find areas to mix some big puddles and paint big shapes. And then at the end, after that, then you come in and paint the drop shadows and the windows and the shadows in the trees and cattle down here, or whatever it is that you're gonna be working on to add the illusion of detail. And again, that's not that stuff isn't important. It's very important. The jump from here to here is pretty big, okay, to make it convincing. But if this isn't working, no amount of detail is going to save your painting. Okay, you can do this kind of these small detail shapes and stuff to make it more convincing, but it's got to be working as this first. Now I've got some examples here of some reference photographs and really busy photographs here to show you how this works. Okay, this is way too much to paint. All this information here, Central Park in New York City. Okay, the skyline in the background, the trees, the rocks, the figures, the fountain, everything going on. Where do you even start? Okay, so when I'm doing a value study of this, I squint down and I look and I see, okay, the sky is light. All right, and these little lanterns are light. A lot of the ground plane is light. The umbrella has some lights on it. The tops of the little bikes and stuff has some light in it. Okay, so those areas I'm deciding to leave white paper. All this other stuff, the trees connecting to the skyline, connecting into these trees, coming down into the foreground here, into the bottom of this fountain here, down in here, connecting into a lot of the figures, connecting down here, right here, it connects into this figure, into the puddles, into the base of this, into the reflection here, connects into here. All that can be connected into one big unifying shape in your value study, and you can see it here, just what I talked my way through. The closer up trees, the distant skyline coming through here into these trees, into the base of the fountain, into the figures, into the reflection, around here into the base down here, more reflection in the fountain. So it's all reading as one big connected shape. Then on top of that, you put in the little darks, the figures, okay? The darks for the fountain, some of the tree branches, the darks around these guys, and the rest of those things to add the illusion of detail, the lamp posts, all that kind of stuff, all right? So, but that's afterwards. Again, it's got to be working underneath all that information first, and then those details are little accents to make it more convincing. Here's another very busy scene, a street scene. Again, if I just threw this reference photograph at you and said, paint it, where do you even start? Okay, this is way too much information to paint. So when you squint down at it, though, it's really obvious. Once again, sky is light. Ground plane down here is light. You've got some light on the cars here, light on the lampposts, light on these sides of these buildings, all right? So there are definitely some obvious lights, and it really helps to squint down to see those light shapes here, okay, when you're doing this. Now, so again, I leave those areas white paper on the value study, and I just jump right to this, okay? This is way too much to paint. This I can paint, all right? That one big connected shape. And once again, it allows for beautiful lost edges where this building can merge into the car. The car can merge into the street. It can merge into this building, into the background building, into this car, across the street, into this building, down into the reflections and shadows, okay? Lost edges in watercolor, lost and found edges. But I understand that's a big jump going from this reference photo to this. But when you squint way down at it, you can see, you know, as I click back and forth quickly, you can see those light areas and the shadow areas, okay? Sometimes it takes a little bit more work, but it's all about giving yourself a fighter's chance of tackling something complicated and simplifying it down and finding an area where you can grab big brushes and paint big shapes. Like I said, there's no, this painting, this is kind of a scene lends itself to, you know, really tightly overworked bunch of little separate shapes. It's all going to break down. So it's really important when you're painting something this complicated to be able to see it in terms of this, you know, a few big shapes on here. Same thing here. This scene, again, where do you even start on here? But when I squint at it, trying to find the light shapes, the sky is light. The big house here is light. Sky is light. We got some light down here, lights on the building here. A lot of this ground plane on the street is light. This building is light, okay? So it's pretty obvious where your main lights are. And then everything else, you can find a way to connect. Starting here to this background hill, up into these trees, coming down into the shadow sides here, more of these trees, into this big building here, middle value, right into this rooftop, into here, into the shadows on the road, connecting down here into this stuff, okay? Just trying to find a nice big long connection in these shapes through a value study. So this is way too much to paint. This I can paint, all right? Now I've got the darks on top of here as well, but and I cropped this scene down a bit. I didn't really like the two towers up here, so I zoomed in a little bit and simplified the composition. But you can see, how much easier something like this would be to paint versus, just having that reference photo with all those individual shapes. So here we go again. Here's my painting of this that followed the value study really closely, followed my game plan. The darks are making some separations in here and breaking up, some of the lost edges that I found. But underneath those darks, you can see where some of these shapes are just kind of merging and fuzzing right into each other. This is merging right down into here, right into the shadows, right up into here, and into the shadows across the street, up here, and it merges here, and it fuzzes, the grass fuzzes up into this porch, and the porch fuzzes into the shadow side of the wall, and it just kind of continues all the way around as one big connected shape. Okay, so that's my way of tackling the value studies. Here's another example of a value study to finish painting. I'm looking at this scene here, and first order business, squint down at it. Find the lights, okay? I'm seeing light, some light down here, obviously. Lights here. Lights down here on the ground plane. A lot of lights back up here on the top surfaces back here. Okay, it's a very bright scene. There's a lot of sunlit areas, obviously, breaking their way through all this. But so my first order of business is to squint and try and separate that down into a basic two shapes. Everything that's in light, I leave white paper. Everything else, I try and connect into one big middle value. So I'm going back and forth here between these two. The color version, my first step in my value study. And there's hardly anything in this shape that I painted that's sitting alone. The background trees are connecting into the tent. The tarps are connecting into the poles. The poles are connecting into this shape, into this barrel, into the shadow here, connecting to the horse, connecting to the figure, connecting into here. Okay, so I kind of force myself to find those connections again to simplify the composition. The more you break it down into 20 little separate shapes, the more it's confusing for the viewer to look at and understand from a distance. We need to simplify all this information into an easily readable composition. You want your painting to read well from across the room when someone walks into a gallery or show. Okay, now all these white areas on my painting or on my value study, they represent the light wash. So now when I do a color painting, I'm going to redraw all these shapes. I'm going to redraw this scene, and then I wet the paper, and I've got to kill the white of the paper. All right, so I'm going to have to get in this light, all the light greens here. I need this light pale yellow here. I need this light pale blue green in the background, the light on the back end of the horse. Okay, all those colors that I'm seeing as light that I left white paper on the value study need to be tinted in my color version. So I redraw it, and then this is my first wash on a color painting. Okay, almost everything is covered up. If I see something that's white of the paper, like these these areas down here where it's really glaring white, I'll leave that white paper. But basically everything else is kind of covered with a light tone, and those areas are what's going to be left behind on the value study when I paint when I paint my middle value shape and leave gaps behind. Instead of white paper being left behind, you're going to have these colors left behind. Okay, so that's all this wash is for, is getting rid of the white paper, so that when I go to the next step and copy this shadow shape or this middle value shape in color, and I leave gaps behind, I've got these colors left behind and not white paper. Okay, so this shape that I painted here, when you compare this shape to my value study, they're almost exactly the same. I'm following that map. And all the lost edges, look at all the lost edges up here, the colors coming in and merging together here, bleeding into here. This warm colors in the tarp merge right into the red of the shadow, merges right into these violets down here. Okay, merges, and those merge into the grasses. The figure merges with the horse. Okay, this horse merges with the horse behind it over here. That horse merges down with the shadows and coming back into here. Okay, just trying to connect as many shapes as I can, really taking advantage of the fluidity of watercolor, painting big shapes, And it's already, even without any dark details, it's already very clear what this scene is. Okay, you're making it very visually obvious to the viewer what it is that the scene is when you don't break it up quite so much into a bunch of small shapes. All right. Hi, my name's Andy Evansen. Over the course of this year, I'll be discussing a lot of ways to improve your paintings with a focus on watercolor in particular. Watercolor is a popular medium, but there are technical issues that can become stumbling blocks during the learning process. Painting becomes a lot more fun once you solve them and can start refining your craft. I'll cover topics that are unique to watercolor, such as painting wet and wet, the timing and consistency of your washes, the importance of drawing and negative shape making, and more. I'll also be talking a lot about how vital it is to have a plan. The transparent nature of watercolor means you're limited in the amount of fixing you can do once you've started, and indecisiveness, that's what leads to the weak, muddy paintings. Because this course spans a calendar year, you'll be able to see me painting outdoors on location as well as in the studio. We can talk about the differences and similarities of both. I've taught dozens of 3 to 5 day workshops, and most of the time, just as students are starting to figure things out, it's time to say goodbye. This course through Tucson Art Academy Online allows me to work with you for an entire year, so we'll be able to get into things that just aren't possible in a 4-day workshop. As an artist who also loves to teach, I'm really excited about the possibilities of this. I hope you'll join me.